Hello, nerds for Yang. This week's episode is 5 things for the Yang curious. Actually, now that I look at it, I think there's 6.
6 questions.
There's 6. Do you want to say hi?
Okay. Hi, I'm Brandon. You might recognize me from some videos I've done from reading rabbits, and also a small basketball player, I think.
Okay. Ryan, you want to say hi?
Hi.
So, first question. So you're here and you're like, Andrew Yang, he's kind of interesting. I want to know more. So the first thing you're probably curious is like, Andrew, who? Who is this guy? Where did he come from? I've never heard of him. I've heard of Kamala Harris. I've heard of Joe Biden. I've heard of Cory Booker. Well, you know what? Those guys have been running for office all their lives. Andrew Yang's just a normal business guy who wants to solve problems. And up until probably like a year ago, he wasn't even on anyone's radar. And that's probably why you've never heard of him. Little background, he was born in New York State in Schenectady. His parents are immigrants from Taiwan. His father was a physicist who worked for IBM and General Electric. His mother and father met in grad school. And he has one brother who is a psychology professor. He went to high school in New Hampshire at Phillips Exeter. And he did his undergrad at Brown University where he majored in economics. And then he has a law degree from Columbia Law School in New York. Then he briefly was in corporate law for I think about 6 months at one of the sort of blue chip white shoe law firms in the city. And then he did his own startup, which did not succeed. And then he eventually worked at another startup and then became the CEO of that company, which was then acquired. And that was a test prep company for people who are applying to graduate school. I think it was called Manhattan Prep. Then he started something called Venture for America, which was designed to encourage high potential college graduates to, rather than go work in banking and consulting like everybody else at those schools, to start businesses, especially in non-traditional metropolitan areas, so not New York, not San Francisco, but sort of throughout the U.S. And it was actually the result of him trying to create more jobs with Venture for America. I think he claims that 3,000 jobs were created by Venture for America companies. He realized that more and more jobs were being eliminated by automation and technology. And so then he said, hey, we got to solve this, and then went to DC, met with a lot of senators and congressmen, and basically was met with people saying, well, that's not a problem, or that's an interesting problem, we should look into it, or that's an interesting problem, we really can't touch that. And so, what are you doing, bro?
Just sitting here.
Okay. So that's who's Andrew Yang. So now you know a little bit about him.
Next question.
Okay, next question. We're moving on. Okay, next question is, what is the deal
with UBI?
Yeah, what's the deal with the universal basic income? Or as he calls it, do you know what he calls the UBI?
No.
The Freedom Dividend. So basically his argument is that as the economy evolves and we are in this huge industrial revolution of technology, software, robotics, artificial intelligence, more and more jobs that normally high school graduates would have available to them, like truck driving, retail, clerical, administrative, call center, those jobs will be increasingly automated. And these people are not just going to overnight become data scientists and coders or, chemical engineers. Maybe the next generation can kind of adapt to the new economy, but there's going to be huge disruptions to today's workforce. So his argument is like, okay, well, there's all this value being created. Like we have a $20 trillion economy. Companies like Amazon are doing $200 billion a year in sales, but they pay zero in federal income tax. Netflix, huge technology company. We all use it, love it. We pay every month. How much federal income tax did Netflix pay? Zero, right? So Yang's proposal for the Freedom Dividend / universal basic income is that every U.S. citizen over the age of 18 gets $1,000 a month, no strings attached.
That's pretty much.
That's a good amount of money. You wouldn't get it until you're 18, though. And he would pay for that by mainly a value-added tax, which is kind of like a national sales tax. And the argument would be like, Amazon's not paying any federal income tax. Netflix not paying any federal income tax. These are some of the most valuable companies in the world. Alphabet has a lot of revenue that goes through Ireland, which then does not get taxed by the U.S. federal tax system. So if you have a national sales tax, it's much harder for companies to circumvent paying taxes. And, he's not anti-business. He's a businessman. He's an entrepreneur. But I think his argument is like, hey, these companies are going to play by the rules of the game. And if we as a government set up the rules so people don't have to pay tax, so companies don't have to pay taxes, like they shouldn't. In fact, as a shareholder of one of those companies, you would want that company to do everything it can to pay as little taxes as possible. So his argument is you do the value-added tax on this $20 trillion economy. You only pay for adults the Freedom Dividend. It's also, you have a choice. If you're getting government assistance already, in which we already have almost, I think, $800 billion a year in government assistance payouts. So you can't get both. You either, like, if you're getting food stamps or fuel, like winter energy kind of subsidies, you kind of pick. And the hope is that this will also inject $2.4 trillion into the economy, which then gets spent by people, which then stimulates the local economy. The government will recuperate a little bit of that through the value-added tax. And at the end of the day, the people who really are struggling and who will be heavily disrupted, they get a little bit of like a safety net. It's not meant so that you don't have to work. You can, in theory, live on $12,000 a year. But, I think the argument would be more like, well, let's say you're a school teacher and you really love what you do, but you're only getting paid, $30,000 a year or $40,000 a year. Well, now you can add another $12,000 and you might be more likely to pursue those jobs that, maybe they're not paying as much as an investment banker, but they actually add a lot of value. So that's the UBI. That's like everybody knows Yang for it. I will say he has actually over 70 other proposals. This is like one of 70. He probably has more than 70.
So that's his first thing he wants to do to stop the robots?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. He doesn't want to stop the robots. He wants to acknowledge that the robots and software and technology are going to replace a lot of people's jobs. And this is a way to help those people transition and find new, more more sustainable work. So he's a big fan of trade schools. Like his argument is like, hey, we still need plumbers, we still need roofers, we still need car mechanics. In America, only like 5 or 6% of people go to trade school, but like in Germany and other parts of Europe, it's like 50%. And so his argument also is that, wow, you know, like just saying college should be free is not going to solve this problem. Like, okay, you send everybody to college, yeah, then what are they going to do? Like, they're actually, if you graduate from college, there's no way you can become a plumber. There's no way you can become a roofer. But it's not guaranteed that you're going to become a coder for Facebook or Tesla either. Like, those jobs are
pretty complicated.
They're complicated, and there's not that many of them. Like, Amazon probably employs maybe 100,000 people, but there's 300 million people in America. Like, they're not going to be able to give everybody a software engineer job.
That's a lot of
people
yeah.
that are not going to have a job that they, in the old days, they could go work at Ford, they could work at Carrier, they could work in retail, they could work in a call center, they could work in shipping and truck driving, they could drive a taxi. You know, there were a lot of jobs, but a lot of these jobs are going away.
Because of
technology, automation, software. You know, I mean, if you own a trucking company and someone said, yeah, well, you know what, you can use a robot truck with self-driving, which will be less likely to have a car accident, will have more...
I think it would be more likely to have a car accident.
Oh, well, that's where you may be wrong, because truck driving is a really, really hard job, and people get tired. And there might be inattention to driving. There could be, like, impaired driving from fatigue.
But, like, the robot, like, things aren't, like, that... Are they, like, too... like so strong enough to have the power to do that?
Yeah, so they're getting there. Like even in our car, in our little SUV, sometimes we use the self-driving mode.
Yeah, but that only, like, one time we almost crashed.
Yeah, we did almost crash because of it. So they're not perfect. But if we can have our SUV drive on the highway for a few minutes at the time, it's not that crazy to think of like, well, will there be a world where a truck can drive half an hour at a time, and then an hour at a time, and then 4 hours at a time? Next thing you know, they're driving themselves. I mean, this is not that far out.
I feel like we're going a little too far. We're supposed to be doing that, right? I thought we were supposed to be doing this.
Oh, we're coming off track from our
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, you want to get back on track?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe we can do another video in the future about how real are self-driving cars. But I will tell you this. If you ask your grandma, do you think one day people will have phones that give you directions? If you asked her that 10 years ago or 15 years ago,
yes,
she would have been like, no way.
But
now, like with Google Maps, it's amazing. So... Pretty cool. Technology's coming. And the thing is, like, we don't have to be afraid of it. Let's just embrace it. But let's also acknowledge that it's going to affect a lot of people. And just telling them that they can go to college for free.
Millions, right? Millions.
It will affect millions of people. Totally. And it could benefit them too. But people need to work. People need to pay the bills. Okay.
Next question.
All right, next question. So that was mainly about the UBI. So next question, does he have a chance? Like,
exactly.
Okay, so you might be out there and you're like, what? Like, I'm ready to support Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Beto. There's all of these kind of very well-known candidates. Why would I support this guy, Andrew Yang, who maybe I've never heard of before?
And instead of the other people.
Right. So let's sort of just give some facts. Number one, he has already earned eligibility to be in the Democratic National Committee organized primary debates in June. So he will be there with Biden, Beto. Hey, dude, we're trying to record something. Harris, all of the usual suspects. Bernie, right? So that's number one. And I think if you watch him speak, you will quickly realize why so many people, myself included, are excited about him, because he doesn't talk like a politician.
Talks just interesting.
Yeah, he talks very interestingly. Moreover, he's very sensible, reasonable, based on facts, statistics, math. He's trying to solve problems. He's not trying to divide us. So I like that. So that's number one. He will be in the debates. Number two, he already has 79,000 individual donors. Pete Buttigieg, who was on CNN Town Hall, huge coverage, which Yang has not. So CNN, come on, man, you guys gotta put them on a town hall too.
Get ready.
Buttigieg just qualified in March with 65,000. On social media, he's got about 200,000 followers on Twitter. In terms of mainstream media, he's now been on MSNBC, Morning Joe. He was on Fox News a few times.
Very funny stuff.
Oh, he was also on, you're thinking of The Daily Show?
The poop.
Yeah. So, the poop joke, right? With Ronnie Chang, I think. And right now, he's also polling nationally. Only 1%, though. So let's keep it real. He's got a long way to go. I will say a few weeks ago in national polling, he was 0%.
That would be bad for him.
That would be bad. But going from 0 to 1 is in the right direction, right?
He's getting more higher.
Yep. Okay, so now you might be asking, okay, this Yang guy sounds plausible. This Freedom Dividend is kind of interesting. Ryan, we're trying to record, and if you're making paper airplanes, the audio is interrupting. So can you build that outside or stop building? Okay. So now you might be wondering, okay, he's kind of interesting, but what about Biden? What about Harris? What about Warren, Booker, Beto? Okay, here's my view. I'm a Yang supporter. I don't think any of those other candidates are bad, but I do have concerns about each of them, and I think I'll share them.
Do you feel a little hoping for Andrew Yang to win, right?
Yeah, of course. We are hoping. Number one, Biden. Love Biden. Super likable guy. Great bio. Very honest. A lot of experience, but he's just sort of what's fresh and new about him?
Nothing.
It feels like he's just I can almost predict his proposals, because they all are going to be the same. So with Harris is fine. I like her kind of tenacious, kind of strong, kind of prosecutor's vibe. But I also feel like she may not be able to connect with the independents and conservatives. And so I suspect her appeal would be most strong within the hardcore Democratic Party. But I don't know how she would do with independents. With Elizabeth Warren, Warren is good because she definitely isn't afraid to pick a fight with Trump. So she's pretty tough.
Maybe the next video we can talk about him.
Yeah, about Warren, Elizabeth Warren, or Donald Trump?
Trump.
Maybe. But we're trying to stay positive.
Okay.
So with Warren, yeah, she's good. I just, I don't know. Well, she's advocating breaking up the tech companies. I guess that's the thing with Warren. What are you fired up about? Booker. So Cory Booker, I loved Cory Booker when I saw a documentary about him running for mayor of Newark. But since he's made it to to DC, I feel like he's not super authentic, and he's just sort of been running for president forever, and nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a great aspiration, but I also think he's going to have difficulty winning over skeptical independents. You know, one of the things that I think helped with Obama was this authenticity, and I don't feel that with Booker. And with Beto's the opposite. He seems super authentic, super heartfelt, super hopeful. Just has no policies. Like, well, what is it that you want to do other than be positive and, you know, stand on bars and tables and stuff. So, you know, look, I will support any of those folks if they get nominated, but I feel like we need some bigger change than from those alternatives. Now, to keep it real, Yang is far from perfect. I have some legitimate concerns for him and his team. Like, one is when you run his Freedom Dividend math, and he talks about how this injection of $2.4 trillion into the consumer economy will stir economic growth. He claims 12% growth in some of his interviews. I don't know when the last time the U.S. economy grew by 12%, but that's pretty aggressive. And I don't think you need 12% GDP growth to pay for it. I think the VAT plus some of the savings long term could cover it. And maybe, you know, 1,000 is a nice even number, but even like a $5,000 a year dividend might be easier to sell. So I'm not sure about the whole 12% growth thing. I feel like that's a optimistic estimate. And it just sort of then weakens the argument, because then people are like, oh, come on, that would never work. The rollout strategy, I think he's been kind of, he's mentioned it in the Fifth Column podcast interview that he would start with like piloting it in a few states. But I think he should be more clear about that. Like, it's not like, you know, you swear in and then everybody gets $1,000 check a month. Maybe you start in a small state like Rhode Island or Vermont or Maine or something like that, or Iowa, and then, you know, kind of like perfect the model and figure out how it's working. So I think like being clear that, look, we're not going to try and do this overnight. We're going to be thoughtful about it. And there are some issues like fraud and abuse and that kind of thing. Foreign policy, I don't really know where the guy stands on foreign policy. I'm sure he'll be reasonable. I know he's very, very focused on fixing the problems of the country and not really meddling in other countries, and that's great. But as an example, like, you know, I'm sure he probably supports the Paris Accords around global climate change. I would be curious what he wants to do in Syria, what he wants to do about North Korea, what he wants to do about China, Russia, United Nations.
Maybe other places.
Other places, yeah. And then last, just a stylistic thing. I do feel like sometimes he has this nervous laughter in interviews. And maybe it's not nervous laughter, it's more like...
happy.
Yeah, and it's kind of sometimes a little bit...
suspicious.
Nah, it's not suspicious. Like, I don't think he's like a bad guy. But, I just think it's a style thing. Like, I love that he's happy and positive and he has a good sense of humor. That's great. There are times where the laughter happens like in the middle of a serious discussion. So, at any rate, that's a nitpick. Now, hopefully this video was interesting to you. If you want more information, I have some resources that I'll put a link to below. One is this channel that you should subscribe to because we'll upload a new video every week discussing something related to the Yang campaign. Second is the yang2020.com website where you can see the 70 policy proposals that he has. Third is I will recommend the podcast. It's like a 2-hour interview with him and Joe Rogan on YouTube. And then another one is an interview with the Fifth Column. The Fifth Column interview I thought was really interesting because the interviewer is very skeptical, and you'll see how Yang kind of handles these challenges. Now, he was, I think, in college on the debate team, so you could tell like he's not easily frazzled. But he's also pretty reasonable when people raise concerns. So that's it for this week. Hopefully you're a little more curious about Andrew Yang or more supportive of him. Feel free to share this video with friends who are wondering like what's the deal with this guy, starting to hear about him more on social media or seeing him on TV. In summary, he born in New York to physicist parent, went to great schools, lawyer, entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur, then started a nonprofit focused on jobs. Number 2, his big thing is the universal basic income or Freedom Dividend. Number 3, he's getting some nice traction. He's got like 200,000 followers on Twitter, 79,000 unique donors. He's going to be at the debates. He's polling right now at 1%, but he was at 0. And just to be clear, you might be like, well, 1%, that's terrible. That is tied with, so he's tied with Julian Castro, who was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development from 2014 to 17 under Obama, and he's had sort of quite a national profile. He's tied with Amy Klobuchar, who is a sitting congressperson. He's tied with Tulsi Gabbard, who is also in Congress. And he's also tied with Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, and John Hickenlooper. He's polling above Kirsten Gillibrand, who's a congresswoman from New York State. So he's not last, but in fairness, like Bernie and Biden are each around 26%. So he's got a lot of room to grow there. That is my summary. Subscribe, comment, share, and hopefully we'll see you next time on the Nerds for Yang channel.
Hooray!
Hooray for nerds!
Hooray!
Hooray for math! Hooray for math? What? Hooray for reading? Yeah, okay, fine. You'll take reading.
Oh, hey.
Hooray for strawberries!
Hooray!
Yay, hooray for organic fruit! Yay! Get your strawberry dividend!